Well, hello, friends. Taking a car today, too. So, thought I would do another commute talk, but today I'm going to tell you about a story from the past. So, I used to work on the WebKit project for many, many years. The browser engine that today powers Safari and, various open source browsers for GNOME and KDE. Probably some browsers that I never heard of. Many, many mobile browsers. Various video game console browsers, stuff like that. Anyway, everybody knows WebKit, I think. And when I started working on WebKit, it was back in 2009, and it was back in the day when Google and Apple were like the big contributors to WebKit. Google had recently come out with Chrome, like a few years before. And I started working on WebKit working at Nokia, and spent almost 2 years there, and then went to Apple to continue working on WebKit there. But anyway, this is a little story about what was going on when Google decided to leave WebKit and make their fork called Blink. So I think it was in 2013. And maybe it seemed to be out of nowhere for people on the outside, but on the inside of WebKit at the time, there was some serious tension, and there was some serious tension between some really stubborn people, and let's say some very, very, very stubborn people, and some of whom had some childish tendencies. And one of those people was probably me. And I certainly had a lot of childish tendencies at the time. I probably still do, but I'm a bit more adult now, I like to think. After they just decided to leave, there was some amount of upset in the community, and certainly I was at Apple at the time, and we were very upset. At the same time, relieved that, like, finally those Googlers are leaving. Now we can do things the way we like. At the same time, it was like the disintegration of the, in my opinion, the coolest, most interesting partnership between tech giants that ever was. Which was incredibly sad to me as a programmer, right, or as a technology enthusiast. But at the time, it just seemed like such a relief. But then something that started happening after they forked was that because the code bases were so similar, we were now like fixing the same bugs on two sides. So naturally, there was a lot of like watching each other's repositories. Like, oh, see, now they fixed this bug over here. We're just gonna port that over to our code base. And like, oh, look, they made this little performance improvement here. We're just going to port that over to our side. And keeping up with that was like, in the beginning it was doable because the code bases were identical, obviously, but then over time they started to accumulate little differences. So it sort of, became not entirely trivial it became a non-trivial task to port stuff over. And then there started sprouting up these people who were working at various companies. I don't want to name anyone, but basically they made it seemingly their job to take patches from one project and port them over to the other project. And it was very, very strange. And at the time, I remember thinking that this is probably because they want to qualify for like this contributor status, like you get commit access to the repository if you get a certain number of patches, stuff like that. And I heard some whispers that many companies would give you some sort of bonus or whatever if you would gain committer status in WebKit or Blink. So people had incentive to land a lot of patches, and so there was this golden opportunity for people like that to just copy patches over between the projects. And so here come my childish tendencies. That I figured out that that I should fuck with these people, and maybe I can get everyone to help me. So what I did was I invented this acronym called CTTE. CTTE, yeah, and I started slapping it on patches, and not really explaining entirely what the patch was about, but instead just like deferring to CTTE to give enough context. And my coworkers at Apple, they knew what CTTE stood for, so to them the patches made sense. But if you were an outsider just copying patches between the repositories, you see my patch, then like copying it over to the other side, you're gonna have to like explain. This was my thinking, that like you're gonna have to explain, well, what does this patch do? Like, what is CTTE? And of course you couldn't, because I never explained it anywhere. And I got a fair number of people to participate in this whole thing. So we had many CTTE patches for a while there in 2013 and 2014. And there were many times when people would come on the IRC channel for the project and ask, like, so what does CTTE stand for? And I would just go silent. Everybody would go silent, or just try to change the subject. People were asking on the bug tracker, like, yeah, this looks like a good patch, but what's CTTE? It was so stupid. But I guess I'm ready to break my silence. So CTTE stands for compile time type enforcement, and it was just to say that that we are making some improvement in this patch, where we are giving the compiler additional type information so that it can enforce slightly more correct behavior or slightly better behavior. For instance, by passing a narrower or more specific pointer type to a function, which then allows the compiler to devirtualize virtual calls, because the pointer is more specific, so it can look at virtuals and see, like, oh, this is a final override function.
In 10 kilometers, take exit 45 onto 26.
Yes, thank you, GPS. Yeah, so it can devirtualize if something is final. It can be devirtualized with a type pointer, and we were also doing a lot of stuff to clean up DOM code, document object model code in WebKit, to make sure that like a function that is only ever supposed to operate on like a certain type of element cannot be called with an arbitrary DOM node. And those were also like under the CTTE umbrella. So we would say, like, well, this function used to accept a node star, but now it accepts a say like an HTML anchor element ampersand, a reference. So that's what that was about. It was compile time type enforcement. I don't know how many patches we did with CTTE tagged in them. Probably over 100. It was a very silly time, and eventually I lost interest in putting CTT on stuff. But that said, like the patterns that I picked up while doing this are still with me to this day. Like I got I fell in love with compile time type enforcement, making sure that you're using the most specific or narrowest type as much as possible, so that you can always give the compiler the whatever information you might have about a type. You make sure that the compiler shares that with you, so that it can make decisions that are good. And likewise, it helps you from not screwing up and not doing things that don't make sense. For instance, in WebKit, there used to be a lot of code that would null check pointers that could never ever be null, and we knew they were not null because we would check if they are null, and then we would pass them to some function, and then that function would check if they're null, and nobody else ever called that function, so we could just make that function take a reference instead of a pointer. We could get rid of the null check, and there's one less little null check to overload your cognitive memory, or whatever you call that. Yeah, so that's what CTTE was about in WebKit, and CTTE lives on in all the code that I write, and I don't have any more to say about that. So that was just a stupid story about the WebKit blank fork. Thank you for listening and hanging out with me on the commute today again, and I will see you next time.